Hello, Brigade.
It's sleeting right now. Morning. Another day, another real-world test. Today, we're doing it on the Microsoft Surface Pro 9, and I have here the Intel and the Snapdragon version. We'll talk about the difference between those a bit later. But we're gonna explore all while we test out these devices as per the usual, but first things first. It's a great rainy day. Heated hoodie. Also, I think we're gonna do a real world test on this guy when the weather gets better outside. It's sleeting right now.
Coffee. Check. This is Stowaway, a spot that I've been meaning to come to that opened at the end of 2021 out of a North Carolina chef falling in love with a girl and a neighborhood here in Greenpoint, the neighborhood just north of the one that I live in and where my studio is. Now, the space is meant to be a, quote, lived-in space of a clandestine traveler, someone who has collected things over time, end quote. And yeah, I kind of feel like I'm in an old traveler's living room. Makes sense. And while it's known for a Southern-style brunch, which I need to come back for during the weekend, they have plenty of Southern comfort food dishes on the menu like these hush puppies. Think like deep-fried sweet corn fritters that also come with a molasses butter. It's delicious. Your arteries won't like it, but it's delicious. Now while we're here though, let's talk about the design of the Microsoft Surface Pro 9. Firstly, they removed the headphone jack. I don't know. It feels like an unnecessary change, but the truth is, I guess, I rarely have a pair of wired headphones on me, and I couldn't tell you the last time that I actually used one. Even editing video, which has in the past been hard to do over Bluetooth, thanks to lag, which makes it impossible to perfectly time editing to the beat of a song, for example, most new wireless earbuds seem to work well enough that I just don't really notice anymore. Now, other than that, honestly, it's a pretty minor update design-wise across the Surface lineup, if we're honest, not just the Pro 9. But the display here is 120 Hertz and it is adaptive, which is nice. And above that display, we have a front-facing camera, which also supports Windows Hello, as in it has the particular hardware required for essentially face unlock for the laptop, which I find works well enough. Personally though, I always prefer a fingerprint sensor, but maybe that's just me. The laptop itself though is super thin and light. It's under 2 pounds and about 2.5 with the signature keyboard and the Slim Pen 2 attached. And speaking of a keyboard, as the usual here, it doesn't come with the computer. So you have to buy that separately, but you have a few choices to choose from in terms of style, including ones with a slot for the Slim Pen 2, which is what is recommended to use with this laptop for a stylus, and one that even has a fingerprint reader, which is nice. But we also have a ton of color choices to mix and match with the laptop itself. Now the laptop, which comes with an Intel and a Microsoft SQ3 version, has different colors available. The Intel version comes in silver, blue, green, and black. The blue is what I have here. And the Microsoft SQ3 version only comes in silver, which I paired with a red keyboard in this case, just to add some personality to it.
And now we're at my studio that I share with two other YouTubers that you might know, Jaime Rivera from PocketNow and Michael Fisher from MrMobile. If you don't know who they are, I'll leave links below so you can check them out. They do great stuff. But while we're here, let's talk about the differences between the Intel and the SQ3 versions of the Surface Pro 9. Now, firstly, there is no more Surface Pro X. Instead, we have the same Surface Pro 9, just one with either an Intel i5 or i7, and a Microsoft SQ3 version, which is a rebranded Qualcomm Snapdragon 8CX Gen 3 chipset. Regardless, it definitely simplifies the Surface lineup a bit, and we have some differences between these two models that are worth noting. Now, they do have the same weight, the same screen, the same specs for the most part, just the chipset really is different. If you're not familiar, I have a video on ARM chipsets, which is the type of architecture that our phones and the SQ3 chipset in this case use, versus the x86 chipsets like Intel and AMD, and what the actual differences are, and I'll link that below. But just know that that means that x86 apps that aren't created for ARM usually need to be recompiled into an ARM instruction format for it to work. But there are ways around this. We'll get into those in a sec. And for this particular laptop, here are all of the real world differences between them. So firstly, we have 5G and Wi-Fi 6E on the SQ3 model, as that Snapdragon 8CX Gen 3 chipset has 5G integrated into it, including millimeter wave and sub-6, whereas the Intel model is Wi-Fi only. So right there, if you want a connected version, 5G, LTE, which are both built in, you have to go with the SQ3 version. There is no option for that on the Intel version. Now, we also have no Thunderbolt 4 on the Qualcomm version. Instead, it's USB 3.2. And essentially, this comes down to the fact probably that Intel charges a fee to use Thunderbolt because they own that. It's proprietary to them. But we have seen Thunderbolt on other ARM-based chipsets like the MacBook Pros that all use the M1 and M2 chipsets. Those are also ARM. And we don't see it here most likely because Microsoft probably didn't see the value in adding that extra cost to it for this type of a laptop at least. And the Intel model, chances are Thunderbolt probably either comes for free with it when you have one of the Intel chipsets, or it is at least a discounted rate compared to putting Thunderbolt on a non-Intel device. Now what that means though is that if you have Thunderbolt drives or monitors or other accessories, they won't fully benefit from the inherent speeds and charging that that spec provides when you use them on the SQ3 model. Now if you look for benchmarks online, you will find that there is definitely a big jump in performance between the SQ3 and the Intel models, with Intel beating it out pretty regularly. But I have to say that using both of these, the difference between the performance of the two models when doing at least most normal work tasks that these are kind of really known for, like surfing the web and taking notes and all of that kind of stuff and using Office and all of that, is definitely less noticeable than benchmarks would suggest. But the Intel version does still seem faster, even if just by a bit. Now on the other side of the equation though, battery life is going to be a bit better on the SQ3 model than the Intel i7 model that I'm using at least. I lost 10% on the Intel i7 model versus the 6% on the SQ3 model while browsing the web and writing and doing research and using Notion, which is a productivity tool that I like to use. Now, something interesting on the SQ3 model is that it has some AI features for the camera that the Intel version doesn't, called studio effects. So we have eye contact, which uses AI to determine where your eyes should be looking versus where they actually are. And it's good for reading while giving a video call presentation, or, you know, checking your phone while you're trying to look like you're paying attention in a meeting. There's also a portrait background blur, which, as it suggests, it blurs out the background for you. And an auto framing feature that will follow you around in the frame automatically whenever you turn that on. These are all mysteriously missing from the Intel version. I was told that this is because of the inherent AI features that Qualcomm, the makers of the SQ3 chipset, put into the chipset, which makes it a lot easier for Microsoft to implement. And lastly, while Windows 11 now has built in a way to translate x86 apps into ARM apps, and that allows them to run better on the SQ3. And most apps that I try and use for at least what this laptop is for, which is like an ultra portable work computer really, more than say a powerhouse machine, work fine. Office is native to ARM, so it works well, so is Edge, and apps like Notion I use a lot, run in emulation, so that runs fine as well. The only big issues I've ever really run into is when I'm trying to use something like Adobe Premiere, which again is not really an app that you're probably gonna be using on this computer, but I had to try it, and it should run technically because of what I said about Windows 11 being able to natively handle these things, but Adobe themselves block it from being installed. And it might be because they are working on an ARM version and don't want people using the non-optimized version for whatever reason. And again, probably not an app you're gonna be using on this type of device. You're probably not gonna be video editing on here. But some other things I tried to install, like Google Drive, so that I'm able to access my Drive files inside Windows Explorer, it stops me from installing it. Maybe something similar, but my Synology NAS program that does the same exact thing is fine. And so just something to note, some of the apps don't work. So I would recommend at least maybe going online, looking for some of the apps that you know you need for your workflow, and seeing if there's any note online of somebody being able to say that they used it or it didn't work. Okay, now let's go grab dinner with a couple of friends and keep talking about some of the other things on this laptop. And tonight we're having dinner with Michael Fisher from MrMobile, David Imel, who now works for MKBHD, and Sherilyn Lowe, who works at Engadget, for a little kind of catch-up dinner here at a restaurant that I like in Greenpoint called Esme. Now, it's a very minimalistic, new American restaurant that feels like a little bit fancier version of a neighborhood spot. There's never a wait, even though it's usually full of people. The food feels sophisticated, but it's not crazy expensive, and the pastas are my go-to here, and apparently everyone else
because we all ordered different ones and we're all gonna share them. Okay, now while I confuse everyone else at this restaurant besides the other tech industry people sitting with me, I want to talk about some of the software changes that Windows 11 now has that aren't specific to the Surface Pro 9, but definitely have made a nice difference, to me at least, when using it. Now firstly, there's a Windows software update called 22H2, and that's the update that has added all of these features. Now it came out in September of 2022, but it improves using the tablet without a keyboard, which is great. So some of the things you can do is like swipe up from the bottom to open the start menu. 3 fingers swiping down will minimize an app. Swiping left or right with 3 fingers will switch between apps. Swipe from the left will give you your widgets. Swipe from the right, your notifications. And even pulling and holding a window to the top of the screen gives you the snap feature, so you can select where you want to snap the window to. But personally, I prefer to throw it angrily to the side anyway. And honestly, I love the snap feature on Windows computers, so much so that I even add it to whatever MacBooks I use with an app called Magnet. But all of these things just kind of make Windows 11 a bit better with a touchscreen than it was. The other thing I think we really quick need to talk about is the pen. And this is the Microsoft Surface Slim Pen 2. Now, I like the size of it. I think it feels like a normal pen size, and it's not like a very tiny stylus that usually comes with phones, so it's just more comfortable for me, and it's super responsive. And I also love that Microsoft is one of the few stylus creators that allows you to turn the pen over to erase. No idea why no one else can do that, but it's super intuitive, obviously. Now laying the screen all the way down and obviously either removing the keyboard or you can fold it back on itself makes for a really nice writing experience. And lastly, for pricing. The laptop starts at $1,000, and that's for the Intel i5 with 128 gig SSD and 8 gigs of RAM, and for colors that will only come in platinum. If you spend an extra $100, you get the choice of colors and a 256 gig SSD. Now, the Pro 9 5G, however, starts at $1,300 for the 8 gig 128 platinum only, obviously, and bumping the storage to 256 gigs will cost you $1,400. And if you want 16 gigs of RAM, you'll have to start at $1,600. And there's also no 32 gigs of RAM option for the 5G model compared to the Intel one, which does have that.
Okay, calling it a night. Now, we do actually have a slightly smaller battery in this Intel Surface Pro 9 compared to last year's Intel Surface Pro 8, but the battery life, I don't know, kind of seems about the same to me, and we do have a little bit more performance, so it's probably the best we could ask for. Now, overall, this laptop, like most of the Surface line that launched this last year, just kind of feels like an incremental upgrade. But if you're a big fan of the 2-in-1 form factor where you have the tablet with a pen, connects to a keyboard, and all of that, you'd still be hard-pressed to find a better one than the Surface Pro 9. At least for productivity, portability, in terms of the hardware, like like most Surface devices, it feels good, it feels premium. Now, with that said though, you will pay a bit of a premium for this laptop compared to other ones that are similar, especially when you add in the cost of the keyboard, the pen. There are definitely some other options out there that would give you probably more for your money, even from Microsoft themselves. Truthfully though, with most of the Surface lineup, they're not being sold that much to your general consumers. They're being sold in much larger numbers to enterprises. And that always kind of makes a lot of sense to me because, look, if you're using Windows for your enterprise, why not use laptops that are made by the same company who makes Windows? And that's really just a nice bonus for your enterprise laptop in that case. Most likely because Microsoft didn't really think it was that truck. Let's talk about the differences between the Intel